Children are innocent beings that depend on their caregiver's attention, protection, and above all else, love. But when a mother decides that basic necessities aren't worth providing and invited a stranger into their home, new levels of low were reached. What was once private is now being exposed in court for the world to see, leaving a mother and her partner forever haunted by the decisions they made the night of August 8th. Let's unravel the story of Nikki Priest and her daughter Kaylee, a family relationship gone terribly wrong. For many, 18 is an age characterized by monumental firsts. First jobs, first majors, first adult relationships. It's a time to stand on the precipice and look out on the rest of your life and all the directions it could go. But at 18 years old, as her peers were dipping their toes into adulthood, Nikki Priest was plunging headfirst. After all, the Birmingham-based teen had given birth to her first baby, a daughter. Bright and beautiful, Kaylee Jade was born January 31st, 2017. Like many children, Kaylee was overly active and could be described as a handful. But to those who knew her, she was also bubbly and happy, with a permanent smile plastered across her tiny face. Before her daughter had turned 1, Nikki had entered a relationship with Dan Gregory, who seemed to enthusiastically take on the role of father. Despite not being her birth parent, Dan bonded with Kaylee and viewed her as his own. The three shacked up at Dan's mother's flat for about 8 months, before moving into their own flat in July 2019 after welcoming a new baby boy. It's here, in flat 14 of the Kingshurst apartment building, where any illusion of familial bliss would fall to pieces. Just a glimpse inside Kaylee's bedroom could tell anyone this was not a child at risk of being overindulged. The space had no princess canopy, no hand-painted drawings on the wall, no tokens of affection that would suggest the girl was anything more than an afterthought. No, Kaylee's room was barren, completely void of a mother's love. If you were to venture into the living room of the flat, you would find a miniature chair and table where Kaylee ate her meals, alone and out of the way. Was Nikki simply slow to adapt to motherhood, or did her lack of effort towards her daughter point to something more disturbing? Often, it seemed that Nikki handed off her parenting obligations to others, like her own mother, while she used her phone to post photos, videos, and live streams. Social media and people's view of her was at the center of her life, according to Nikki's sister, Catherine Priest. But as often as the young mother updated her socials, one aspect of her life was suspiciously separate from her cultivated online persona, Kaylee. In the world of social media, the mother could present as daughterless, but IRL, parenting was an outward struggle for Nikki. According to Dan, Nikki would tell Kaylee off about 3 or 4 times a day and had raised her voice on at least one occasion. During his relationship with Nikki, he also noticed marks on Kaylee, but chalked them up to the child's clumsiness. Nikki may not have been the world's greatest mother, but Dan didn't see her intentionally mistreating anyone as even a remote possibility. Dan's mother had a different perspective. Lisa Dixon had opened her home to the mother and daughter, and she claimed as Kaylee grew, Nikki's parenting style also transformed. Dan's mother watched as Nikki became harsh and, at times, cruel. And although her son claimed he'd never personally witnessed any violent incidents, his mother had. 6. That was the number of instances Lisa had allegedly witnessed discipline with corporal punishment. According to a former babysitter, it was Dan who doted on Kaylee. He would entertain her with games, bathe her, prepare her breakfast, all while Nikki slept in. But from the babysitter's experience, things were worse when Nikki was awake. The mother would use offensive language towards Kaylee and express regret about having her, which would often cause Kaylee to become upset and cry. There's no need, because she's only 1, the babysitter remembered telling Nikki. But the mother wasn't receptive to the unsolicited parenting advice, according to the sitter. She just said it's her child and she can do what she wants. And it seemed Nikki had no idea how sound traveled in an apartment building, or what listening ears could overhear. Slamming doors, cries, and the sounds that could be interpreted as physical strikes were allegedly audible to April Cooper, a tenant at the same apartment building as Dan's mother. It seemed even full sentences could also be made out through the floorboards. "I'm going to end you," April allegedly heard. Then there were incidents outside of the apartment where Nikki was in plain view of residents, including an incident in September 2019 when the neighbor claimed Nikki put Kaylee into her stroller more firmly than she should have. Eventually, April warned the mother that she would involve social services. but didn't make the call, a decision she would live to regret. But April wasn't the only witness, and the complaints continued when they moved to the Kinghurst House apartment building. From the apartment above her, Charlotte Cliff reported hearing sounds of a crying and distressed baby almost every day. One time, the neighbor overheard the words, "Just say she fell off the bed," from the apartment above. But Charlotte claimed there was at least one mitigating factor in flat 14. There would be a male voice when she first moved in, and he sounded more protective, asking what had happened to Kaylee. This was likely Dan. The flat was also allegedly known to host parties. Booming music and the smell of a mind-altering substance drifting from the unit would announce the presence of these social gatherings to tenants who didn't get the invite. But Charlotte Cliff saw a more sinister motivation for the raucous at flat 14. Music played at that volume could drown out anything, especially what Nikki might not want others to overhear. Eventually, Dan and Nikki split up, but it wasn't long before the mother introduced a new man into her life and her daughters. According to Nikki, it was spring 2020 when she started her relationship with a man she'd known for years, Callum Redfern. It would later be alleged that Callum had only been in Nikki's life for a few weeks before tragedy struck. Nikki's sister remembered the relationship starting a few weeks after Nikki split with Dan, and, at least on her sister's side, it seemed immediately serious. Catherine remembered Nikki saying she wanted to have children with him in the future, but it seemed Nikki's relationship with Callum had no impact on how the mother treated her daughter. On July 7, 2020, the babysitter claimed she witnessed a tense encounter. She claimed Kaylee covered her baby brother's head with a blanket and loudly expressed being hungry when Nikki snapped and made physical contact. The mother then allegedly took Kaylee by the arm, bringing her to the bedroom while expressing frustration. "I was going to take Kaylee. I was scared of what she'd do while I was gone because of what she'd done while I was there, but I had to walk home," the babysitter said. When she left, Nikki was in the living room with the door shut and Kaylee was lying asleep on the floor. Callum's friend Matthew Allport claimed both Nikki and Callum disciplined Kaylee, but it didn't seem like anything serious. "Kaylee would be crying for a couple of minutes, then she'd be okay again," he said. And although Nikki had debt and children to feed, she occasionally splurged, not on Kaylee, but on the new man in her life. She gave Callum money to buy himself a BMW, using the universal credit she had to live on for the vehicle, according to Matthew. And it seemed Callum was more than happy to take advantage of Nikki's generosity. When she gave Callum the equivalent of over $900 for the car that ended up costing about $300 less, Matthew claimed his friend told him not to tell Nikki about the remaining cash. This alleged deceit, on top of Callum once leading a police chase with both of Nikki's children in the backseat of his car, made it clear the 20-something had no interest in winning any Boyfriend of the Year award. But it appeared the relationship was destined for nowhere good. It's strange, looking back at the odd TikTok Nikki posted with Kaylee. It's hard to imagine this is the same mother who acted shockingly different behind closed doors. It's even harder to imagine that she could be capable of what would happen next. On August 9, 2020, sirens wailed as medics, law enforcement officers, and forensic experts flooded Stonebridge Crescent. They were all heading to one place, Kinghurst House. It was there, in flat 14, where Kaylee Jade met her end. But what had happened to the 3-year-old who was once so full of life? The walls of flat 14 might not have been able to talk, but video could. And what CCTV footage taken from the day before spoke to was a mother-daughter relationship that was, at the very least, troubling. If you didn't know any better, you might assume Nikki and Kaylee were strangers forced to take an elevator together. Kaylee stood in the corner, staring at her mother, while Nikki tactfully ignored her daughter, opting to focus on her reflection instead. As they walked out of the apartment building and towards the park, Nikki continued to show no effort to hold Kaylee's hand, talk to her, or even look at her. And by tomorrow, she would never have another chance. Although that's where the video footage ended, there was one person who wasn't Nikki, Kaylee, or Callum who could provide insight into what happened in flat 14 on August 8th, Callum's friend Matthew Allport. According to Matthew, the night had started out normally enough. When he entered the apartment, he claimed Kaylee was already in her PJs, pink and white. She was sitting at her separate table eating a dinner of frozen food. From Matthew's recollection, after finishing her meal, Kaylee played around the house as the adults smoked on the balcony. At 7 p.m., as Matthew sat in the living room and Nikki was still on the balcony, he claimed Callum put Kaylee to bed, which took about 10 minutes. Callum's friend recalled hearing muffled voices when Nikki joined Callum in Kaylee's room. As for what they were talking about, Matthew had no clue. Callum and Nikki spent alone time in Nikki's room while Kaylee rattled the stairgate that closed off her bedroom, asking to be let out to play. Her requests were apparently ignored, and Kaylee abandoned the stairgate for bed. But sometime later, Callum was allegedly shouting from the hallway, "Nikki, Nikki, Kaylee's being sick." Matthew heard the sound of a bath being run as Nikki changed the sheets, but throughout the half-hour cleanup, Matthew claimed he never saw what Nikki and Callum were doing, and when he thought about it, he never heard Kaylee get sick or crying. In fact, looking back, he couldn't understand why Callum had been in Kaylee's room after she went to bed if Kaylee hadn't made any noise. But at the time, Matthew seemed to have other things on his mind. Callum's friend had been in a rush to leave the flat for a while since they had out-of-town work the next day. It was Callum who insisted they stay and chill for a bit. But about 40 minutes after Kaylee was put back to bed, Callum suddenly changed his tune. "Come on, let's go," Callum said. Before they left, Callum stepped over Kaylee's stairgate. "Good night, and I'll see you tomorrow," he said into the dark of the room. But Matthew returned to the flat that night to grab sunglasses Callum had left. From the hallway, he remembered passing Kaylee's room. There were no blinds on the window. Clothing and toys, with nowhere to go, lay in heaps on the floor. The carpet appeared to be haphazardly thrown down with minimal effort to lay it flat. And there, on a double bed, slept Kaylee. He could just see her head poking out from under the duvet. She was silent. That's Matthew's version of events. But Callum's friend only saw and heard so much that night. Text messages, on the other hand, might say more about the thoughts occupying Nikki's and Callum's heads on August 8th. At 11:17 p.m., Nikki sent a text to Callum saying Kaylee was sick. She also suggested her daughter was irritable, texting Callum that Kaylee would get upset when she went to check on her. "Been sick in bed again or not? Is she not asleep then?" Callum asked. Nikki said Kaylee just felt sick. The mother then changed the subject to express how nice the visit had been. Callum told her he's going to bed and the two exchanged "I love yous." Nikki also texted a friend that night who was asking her for personal advice about a friend. "I know how you are feeling, girl. I will talk all night," Nikki said. Was Nikki really so blissfully unaware of the horrors that tomorrow would bring? But there were also older text messages that hinted Nikki and Callum might not be so innocent. In an older message to Callum, Nikki said Kaylee made her intentionally injure her hand. "I want to end some," the mother said. In another exchange, Callum said, "It was a shame that they hadn't met earlier as the baby could have been his. Never too late. I want to have a girl," Nikki replied. "I want a girl too, babe, especially with your looks," Callum said. Were these just lighthearted texts between the couple, or did they expose a motivation for not wanting to have a daughter? After all, Kaylee hadn't just passed away. Someone had cut the toddler's life short. According to a pediatric surgeon from a local children's hospital, the degree of force needed to inflict injuries that Kaylee succumbed to would need to be very high. "I've only seen one similar only when an older child was harmed by a horse," he said. In fact, some of Kaylee's injuries were sustained weeks before August 8th, injuries her mother never sought medical aid for. Whatever the cause, whoever caused it, it would be apparent to anybody, that this little girl is desperately ill, pediatrician Dr. Dewey Evans said. If treated, experts agreed Kaylee's injuries would have been survivable. But although Kaylee's life could have ended anywhere between 11 p.m. and 11 a.m., when Nikki called emergency services at 11:11 a.m., the toddler had already passed. All of this raised suspicion that Nikki wasn't just inept in her mothering, she was calculated. On May 21st, 2020, Nikki texted Callum point blank, "I'm going to end her." "Why?" asked Callum. "'Cause she keeps leaving the living room or giving her in the kitchen and I'm sick of it. I've striked her nappy." "Good, give her one from me," Callum said. "I will, babes," replied the mother. On August 9th, Nikki was arrested on suspicion of willful neglect of a child, and Callum was arrested on suspicion of willful ill-treatment of a child. The two were later released on bail, but were far from proven innocent. An investigation was launched by the local police force. One of the first people on the scene the fateful morning of August 9th was Caitlin Harper, an apprentice paramedic. The door was ajar and she announced her presence as she entered the flat. Nikki was crying and distressed and called out, "I don't think she's alive." She was right. It was apparent Kaylee had been deceased for some time, Caitlin recalled. She noted the mother was distant from her daughter. Nikki had not been attempting to resuscitate Kaylee when Caitlin entered, as she would have been instructed to do until emergency services arrived, nor did the mother offer her daughter any physical contact. When speaking with Nikki, Caitlin was told the mother had moved Kaylee to the floor and attempted CPR when she found her in this state at 10:30 a.m. When paramedic Paul Woodcock arrived on the scene, Nikki was in an entirely different room. It's fair to say Priest was rather upset. She seemed a bit like her thoughts were scattered, moving around, not focusing on anything specifically. She wasn't in the bedroom, she was in other parts of the flat, he said. The only accident that Nikki could remember had happened weeks ago, when her daughter fell off her play table. Nikki claimed Kaylee had a reduced appetite and had thrown up after the accident, but was otherwise her normal self. But as the extent of injuries became apparent, the flat was soon labeled a crime scene. Shortly after police arrived, Nikki claimed Kaylee had been perfectly fine, up until somebody visited the flat. Callum had spent up to 10 unsupervised minutes with Kaylee in her bedroom, after which Kaylee became ill, Nikki alleged. She believed something had happened while she was on the balcony on August 8th. She claimed she'd witnessed Callum strike Kaylee a few weeks before, and she'd heard him do it on other weekends when he visited. And Nikki was adamant she was innocent. "I did not end my daughter. I have no reason to lie. At the time, I was scared myself." Kaylee's grandmother found out about Kaylee when Nikki had called her screaming. "She was distraught and completely incoherent," said Debbie Windmill. Nikki's mother messaged Callum for more information on what happened. Callum responded, "I am just as devastated. Loved her as my own. Only found out a couple of hours ago. I am being told different stories. I had done nothing other than sob and cry." It seemed her suspicion grew as she later messaged him, "Do you know anything? Please do not BS me. I have not done anything but sob and cry when I found out about Kaylee. Nikki always put her kids first. Just hope she is okay. I treated her as my own daughter," he said. Nikki's sister had also spoken to Callum over the phone. "I just broke down and said, 'What has happened?' He seemed a bit shifty. He said, 'I don't know,'" claimed Catherine. But all of the ways the devastating news about Kaylee was broken, the way Callum informed his friend Matthew was perhaps the most peculiar. Around noon, Callum and Matthew were relaxing in Matthew's home as Callum used his friend's phone to scroll through Facebook when his mood noticeably shifted. Matthew asked what was wrong. He remembered Callum told him he'd tell me in a bit, but a bit came and went. It wasn't until 3 p.m. when the news was sprung on Matthew. "You'll never guess what happened. Kaylee's passed away," Callum told his friend. No further details were given. I was shocked. He said it out like that, and I was like, "You what?" I thought, "Why didn't you tell me straight away? We're best mates. Why did he not tell me for 3 hours?" And Callum's reasoning wasn't any less perplexing. He said to wait until there was no one with us, but there was no one with us anyway. "I was shocked to think she had passed away early in the hours of that morning," Matthew said. And despite Callum telling Nikki's mother he was devastated, from Matthew's perspective, what happened to Kaylee was at most an inconvenience to his now former friend. All he was bothered about was that Nikki now wouldn't be able to get him another car. He has no job, no money, no friends. According to Matthew, Callum's main source of income, besides the odd job, was Nikki's benefits that he'd used to pay his debts. As suspicions grew over Callum and Nikki, others were in the midst of mourning the toddler who had never made it to 4 years old. Dan Gregory, Kaylee's former father figure, was devastated by the news of the passing of the girl he had helped raise for 2 years. He started a GoFundMe, with proceeds going towards funeral expenses or a memorial. And it seemed like the whole community was grieving for the little girl. Her block was quickly filled with photographs of a smiling Kaylee, along with plushies and balloons to honor the toddler. But someone else was mourning for all of social media to see. Just weeks after Kaylee passed away, Nikki posted a TikTok wiping her tears while lip-syncing the lyrics, "I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. I know I messed up bad. I should have done better." Compilations of old videos and photos commemorating her daughter were also posted with captions like, "RIP my darling, Mommy loves you, Angel." To her critics, these posts didn't show a grieving mother, but a social media addict fiending for her next dose of attention. Yet the memorial videos were just a blip, and Nikki soon transitioned into dancing TikToks and makeup reviews. Nothing could bring Kaylee Jade back, but could the trial provide justice for the toddler? The prosecution for Nikki and Callum's trial described both of their accounts of August 8th as fragile and full of inconsistencies. Although Kaylee had injuries spanning previous weeks, the prosecution argued the brunt of her life-threatening and inevitably life-ending injuries occurred while the two defendants were in the flat. And whether the intent had been an attempt on ending or serious harm, the fact remained that the parties bore a joint responsibility. Both Callum and Nikki denied the charge of murder. Callum claimed he had never been alone with Kaylee in her bedroom that night. And although he hadn't been aware of Nikki's mistreatment in the weeks building up to August 9th, he didn't do it, and that left him with one alternative: Nikki must have. But Nikki's defense argued the only absolute failure in the mother's parenting was letting Callum enter her daughter's life. While Nikki admitted she had raised her voice at her daughter and, at times, had become physical, she claimed there were limits to her discipline and she would never use excessive force. No, according to Nikki, it was Callum who crossed the line. She claimed he was immediately comfortable with disciplining Kaylee. "It started with little taps and then it got worse. You could hear her distress," Nikki alleged. But the mother had never stopped him. "I should have done something for my little girl, but I was scared of what might happen to me because of his aggression. I loved him," she claimed. During the trial, Nikki also went into detail about the events leading up to August 9th. On August 8th, she took her daughter to the park, an outing she claimed Kaylee absolutely loved. And despite what the CCTV might suggest, Nikki claimed she wasn't intentionally neglecting her daughter. "She likes to walk on her own. She likes to run," she said. Then they went back to the flat where Callum and Matthew later joined them. Nikki claimed when Callum took Kaylee to bed, he stuck his head out of the doorway to tell Nikki her daughter bit him. "Kaylee does not bite anyone," Nikki reportedly told him. Callum then allegedly disciplined Kaylee in a way that caused her to cry. Nikki then claimed she reminded Callum of Kaylee's age, to which Callum allegedly responded, "She deserved it." After they put Kaylee to bed, Nikki claimed she went on the balcony to smoke with the door shut. When she re-entered the apartment, Matthew was in the living room and Callum was allegedly nowhere to be seen. She assumed he'd gone to the bathroom until she allegedly heard his voice in the hallway telling her Kaylee was sick. The mother then claimed she went to see her daughter, who was crying in bed and had gotten sick on her bedsheets. When she asked Callum why Kaylee was sick, he allegedly told her he didn't know. Nikki said she then cleaned Kaylee's sheets while Callum gave her a bath. She remembered seeing a mark on Kaylee's chest that Nikki couldn't account for. After the bath, she claimed Callum carelessly placed the crying Kaylee back on her bed. Callum then allegedly asked Nikki to make him tea and pour Kaylee a cup of juice. From the kitchen, Nikki claimed she could hear sounds coming from Kaylee's room. "I heard smacks. I think it was 3 or 5. It was getting louder and louder. I ran to the bedroom and she was holding her stomach." When Nikki asked Callum for his reasoning, he allegedly said Kaylee kept getting out of bed. Still, no alarm bells were going off for Nikki. "I did not think anything of it," the mother said. She left the room, but she claimed Callum only followed her a couple of minutes later. They hung out in the living room. At one point, Nikki went back out on the balcony. She expected Callum to stay the night as he usually did on weekends, but Callum said he wanted to leave. Like Matthew, she allegedly also witnessed Callum step over the gate to say goodnight to Kaylee. She claimed he stayed in the room for a few minutes in silence. She said she spent the rest of her night looking after Kaylee and texting friends and Callum, who kept asking about Kaylee's condition. Nikki claimed that by about 10 p.m., Kaylee had stopped throwing up, but she continued to check on her. When Nikki woke up in the morning, she said she decided to let Kaylee sleep in. She used her phone, brewed tea, took a cigarette break, having no idea, so she claimed, of the nightmares and flashbacks she'd soon be haunted with from this fateful day. Eventually, she went to wake her daughter up, but Kaylee's arm was cold. That's when Nikki's memory allegedly gets hazy. "I just remember dropping to the floor and screaming," Nikki said, and there was one thought she claimed ran through her mind. "What's he done to my baby?" She phoned Callum. When asked why, Nikki said, "I wanted to know what he had done to my little girl." She claimed she didn't call emergency services immediately because she was scared and she didn't know how to approach it. She claimed she knew she had to tell police it was Callum, but it wasn't easy. "I was scared to say what he had done. I was scared he might come at me and hurt me, so I did not want to say anything to the police." From the gritty reality of August 9th, everything from the previous night allegedly looked different to the mother. Sounds she'd not understood at the time. Memories that had seemed innocent. The time spent on the balcony, away from Callum, away from her daughter. "I have had time to look back at it and see his every move," Nikki claimed. Callum's defense claimed Nikki was obsessed with social media and was more focused on her phone than Kaylee. To Nikki, her social media presence said nothing about her ability to parent. "I like to dance. It does not mean I didn't love my little girl. I have not put on an act once. He knows what he has done," the mother alleged. The text exchange where Nikki told Callum, "I'm going to end her," was also brought up. "She had been naughty. It just came out. It does not mean I was going to do it," Nikki said. Many of her texts, she claimed, were exaggerations. As for the state of Kaylee's room, she claimed she was tight on money. "I do agree it was no place for a little girl, but it was getting done," she said. It seemed Callum was better at getting her to open her pockets. When he, Redfern, wanted a car, he stamped his feet for one, Nikki said. As for those neighbors and witnesses who had given details about her parenting habits, they were liars, claimed Nikki. But despite Nikki and Callum's refusals to admit any wrongdoing, in the end, both were convicted of manslaughter. Nikki was also found guilty of child cruelty due to the unreported previous injuries and was sentenced to 15 years, while Callum was sentenced to 14 years. According to Justice Foxton's ruling, instead of tending to the child, the couple had banded together to stop Kaylee from interrupting their alone time permanently. "You lost your tempers and were parties to the which cost Kaylee her life," said the judge. Detective Inspector Adam Jobson, the man behind the investigation, believes the public might never know exactly what happened that night in Flat 14, but there is an inarguable truth that the trial shed light on. "One thing is clear," said the detective. "Nikki Priest has failed her daughter. She's failed to protect her, and she should be, being a mother to that little girl, the one person who should have been able to protect her." Although 2 people were found guilty, it's easy to see the trial's outcome as a hollow victory. After all, there's no bringing back Kaylee. But through honoring her life, those who loved her can extend her legacy beyond the events of August 8th. This is the story of Kaylee Jade, a child who deserved more than life gave her.